Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're strapping in for a rapid, completely objective, and highly focused global tour of three major geopolitical hotspots. We're going to examine the intricate chess moves being played on the world stage right now, and we're basing this entire analysis on recent White House reporting and insights shared by former Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates. So, if you're looking to understand the current administration's global playbook without all the background noise, well, you are definitely in the right place.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our flight path for today. First up, the Iran pressure cooker. Second, navigating China and Taiwan. Third, we'll look at the cost of conflict. And finally, pressuring Cuba's leadership. Let's get to it.
Stop number 1, the Iran pressure cooker. We're examining domestic strains and U.S. policy.
Right now, there's a rather uneasy ceasefire in the Middle East, specifically around the Strait of Hormuz. But, hostilities could absolutely resume if there isn't a formalized deal struck between the U.S. and Iran. And to really show you the urgency the administration is projecting about these negotiations, just look at this direct message from the president on Truth Social. The clock is ticking. I mean, that's not just casual rhetoric, right? It's a highly calculated signal that the window for a diplomatic resolution is actively closing. Basically, Washington is tapping its foot, waiting for a move from Tehran.
So you might be wondering, why exactly is that clock ticking so loudly? Well, according to Victoria Coates, Iran is trapped in a massive domestic pressure cooker right now. They literally haven't been able to export oil for a month, and their oil storage is reportedly completely full. On top of that, their electric grid is failing, causing blackouts, and there's widespread fuel rationing. Now sure, the U.S. faces its own pressures with elevated gas and food prices, but the source emphasizes that our situation completely dwarfs in comparison to the structural crisis unfolding inside Iran. The strategy here? Let this domestic pressure build and build until it backs Iranian leadership into a corner where they simply have to make a decision.
But what exactly is the U.S. demanding in exchange for relieving all that pressure? Well, the administration's absolute bottom line, as outlined by the Heritage Foundation representative, is surprisingly laser-focused. The primary goal is simply to rid the American people of the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. Interestingly, and this is a key distinction, while the U.S. obviously has no fondness for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, eradicating that specific military leadership was never actually the primary objective of this current operation. The focus is entirely on ending the nuclear threat, and then, secondarily, getting the Strait of Hormuz open so those oil molecules can finally flow back into the global market.
And this brilliantly illustrates the administration's view of the whole dynamic. On one side, the U.S. is positioning itself as seeking a rational, negotiated deal to end a nuclear threat. But on the flip side, the source describes Iran's recent behavior as frankly erratic and irrational. We're talking about actions like shelling their own neighbors, even countries that have historically been more sympathetic to them, like Qatar. The core argument being made here is that you simply cannot trust a nuclear weapon in the hands of a state acting this unpredictably.
Moving on to Section 2, navigating China and Taiwan. Let's look at some diplomatic summits and strategic stances.
Shifting our focus over to Asia, we are looking at the direct aftermath of the president's historic summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which was interestingly quickly followed by a strategic phone call with the South Korean president. A massive centerpiece of those discussions, and a primary source of regional tension for sure, is this number right here. $14 billion. That is the jaw-dropping value of a pending U.S. arms sale to Taiwan. It's a massive move, and it sparked intense speculation globally about the future security of that entire region.
Naturally, Taiwan is watching all of this incredibly closely. And Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te issued what I can only call a masterclass in dual messaging in response to the summit. She stated very clearly that while Taiwan will not provoke China or escalate any conflict, they absolutely, under no circumstances, will give up their sovereignty, their free will, or their way of life. Now, to ease the massive global anxieties this stirred up, the White House had to quickly step in to reassure observers that the status quo of American policy regarding Taiwan remains completely unchanged. However, we have to note that this aggressive posturing on the world stage is not without its domestic critics back home. Democrats in Washington are pushing back really hard on the idea of leveraging the relationship with China to potentially influence Iran. Their argument, they say the administration is actually making the country less safe. They're calling for an immediate end to the conflict in Iran, urging the administration to stop digging a hole even deeper, and explicitly stating that the U.S. absolutely does not need China's support to successfully exit these foreign entanglements.
All right, on to Section 3, the cost of conflict. Let's dive into some AI predictions and deterrence strategies.
To really grasp the sheer scale of what's at stake here, the Heritage Foundation recently released an AI-based analysis called Tidal Wave. And across all the AI platforms they used, the staggering finding was totally consistent. A direct war between the United States and China would result in an immediate 10% blow to the global GDP. Let's just put that into perspective for a second. We are talking about an instant global recession, and honestly, very likely a full-blown global depression. The economic fallout would be absolutely catastrophic.
And yet, even with those apocalyptic economic stakes on the table, the threat remains highly credible. Listen to how Victoria Coates frames the possibility of a Chinese move on Taiwan. We have to say when, because it is probably self-delusional to say if. Wow, the source is operating on the stark assumption that this is an inevitable event. That means the U.S. strategy cannot just rely on hoping it doesn't happen. It requires incredibly serious preventative preparation.
So, the crucial point is, how do you actually prevent an event you believe is inevitable? Well, the administration is looking straight into history for the answer, relying heavily on a peace through strength strategy. They draw a really direct parallel to the 1980s. Back then, Ronald Reagan's massive SDI missile defense buildup practically forced the Soviets to bankrupt their own economy just trying to keep pace. Today, that exact strategy is mirrored in the president's proposed $1.5 trillion defense or war budget. The entire goal is to build up the U.S. military so overwhelmingly that it deters China, making an attack on Taiwan simply too undesirable and mathematically too costly for Beijing to even attempt.
Finally, Section 4, pressuring Cuba's leadership. We're looking at the deployment of the Venezuela playbook.
Let's bring this tour a little closer to home. Just 90 miles off the U.S. coast, we find another fascinating application of this high-pressure strategy. We're focusing on Cuba, which is a topic of intense interest, particularly to the vibrant Cuban-American community who desperately want to see the island become a regional asset rather than a security risk. Reports indicate the U.S. is planning highly specific actions against Cuban leadership, and the primary target? Raul Castro. He's the former president and brother of Fidel Castro, and the administration identifies him as still being the ultimate decision-maker on the island. The strategy is to send a crystal-clear, unavoidable signal directly to him. He has to choose between acquiescing to U.S. demands or facing severe personal consequences. They are reportedly executing a very specific formula to make this happen, which the source calls the Venezuela playbook. Step 1. Issue incredibly clear demands, coordinated right from the top by heavy hitters like the CIA director, the Secretary of State, and the President. Step 2. Prepare legal indictments. This perfectly mirrors the aggressive strategy used by Attorney General William Barr back in 2020 against Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. And Step 3, you hold those indictments right over their head and you wait. Either they comply or you enforce the consequences. It's that blunt. As we wrap up our tour today, a very clear, unified picture emerges from all of this source material. Whether we're looking at the Middle East, Asia, or the Caribbean, the administration is heavily utilizing two distinct but complementary levers. On one side, relentless economic and legal pressure, strangling oil exports in Iran or threatening massive indictments in Cuba. And on the other side, unmatched military deterrence, proposing historic trillion-dollar budgets and selling billions in arms to allies like Taiwan. It's a unified, overarching strategy of attempting to force peace through immense, inescapable pressure.
Which leaves us with a final, really vital question to ponder. We've seen how this geopolitical tightrope is strung across the globe. But if deterrence is specifically designed to prevent a war, at what point does applying maximum pressure risk sparking the very conflict it aims to avoid? It is a delicate, precarious balance of power, and the consequences of slipping, as we've clearly seen, are monumental. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay focused, and I'll catch you next time.